Today I am going to talk about seeds that I sow both in the fall, autumn and also in the spring. Hi, I'm Ellie and I'm a cut flower grower here in Taupo, New Zealand. That's gardening zone 9B. I grow and sell cut flowers on a small space just in an urban backyard. So if that's something that you like to learn about and listen about, I'd really appreciate if you followed along. Now, I really love following accounts from Europe and America because it really gives me that inspiration and it helps me plan what I'm going to do in my own space kind of in the next 6 months. So I thought this would be a really useful video for people now in Australia and New Zealand, because I'm going to let you know what I am sowing right now, but also for those guys who are watching from a little bit further afield who might be heading into their fall autumn sowing as well. Towards the end of the video, I'm going to talk about a couple of flowers that I now won't sow in spring, even though they're advertised that you can sow in spring, just based on my experience here in Zone 9B. So if you're interested in those, stay tuned till the end and I'll talk about those as well. Okay, so all the flowers that I'm going to talk about today are what is known as cold hardy. And that means they actually can survive and also thrive from growing through a period of cold. So some of these on the list, I will mention that I actually won't sow too far into spring because the weather just gets too warm for them and they're not going to kind of produce the strong, really tall stems that you want from them because they do prefer that cooler weather. But I will let you know what they are as we go along. Now, if you are spring sowing and planting these flowers and you're still getting hard frosts, when you plant your seedlings out, they haven't had time to really establish. So even though they're cold hardy, they could still be wiped out by a really hard frost because the roots haven't had a chance to really get stuck in there yet and create a nice base for the plant. So if you are sowing these out in early spring and you're still getting frosts, one way you can kind of combat that is just by popping a frost cloth over them. And that means they're still going to get that nice cold weather that they like, but they're not going to be kind of annihilated by a really hard frost very early on. And that's the same with fall sowing as well. Now, heading into autumn, I typically sow my autumn seeds around 2 months before my first frost date. And that gives me time to plant my seedlings out and for them to create that nice solid root base before the first frosts start coming. But it's the same. If you miss that date by a little bit, just pop a frost cloth over them and it's just going to give them that little bit of protection from those really hard frosts. So you can apply the same technique to both spring and autumn. Just by giving them a little bit more protection. So a lot of people will say you have to be very strict with your dates when it comes to sowing cold hardy annuals, but you can combat it by just giving them a little bit of extra love in the way of a frost cloth. Okay, so we are going to start with delphinium, which I actually have some seedlings I'm going to show you. Now these are my delphinium and these are the black-eyed angels and they are very slow growing. So I think these seedlings here will be coming up to around 2 months old now. And you can see they're just starting to get their first set of true leaves. Now, true leaves are the leaves that emerge after that kind of first initial leaf that you get. They kind of show a little bit more what the plant form is going to be like. So delphiniums are very slow growing, but they are a perennial. I'll show you some more that I have. So these are the green twists. They're a little bit earlier on. And I will say when you're growing delphinium, they can be prone to something that's called dampening off, which is when the stem basically rots while the plant is still young. So I do keep my potting mix on the drier side when I'm growing delphinium. Now for me, delphinium is a great one because it's perennial and I love perennial. So it's going to cut out a little bit of that work. And I do get a couple of flushes from my delphiniums as well. So they are really a beautiful cut flower. Very highly sought after for wedding and event work as well by other florists. So it's a great way to make a bit of money as well. A really good value flower. So with my delphinium, I will sow both in the fall and in the spring. And I can sow kind of a few weeks into spring as well, and they're going to be fine. I have found that they prefer a shadier area in the garden. So I have a spot that's very kind of full sun, fairly dry. And I found I get taller stems from bringing in that kind of part shade and a little bit damper, but once the plants are established, because you don't want to get that dampening off, as I said before, when they're still in the seedling stage. So delphiniums are a great one to sow both autumn and spring. Next one we have is larkspur. Now larkspur is so pretty. It just adds that little special kind of sparkle to bouquets that you're not going to find in your kind of supermarket standard bunches, I guess. And for that reason is why it makes my sowing list. Now, larkspur is another one that's going to love that period of cold, so if you can autumn sow, that's great. Saying that, I have just direct sowed some, probably about a month before the first day of spring here, and I'm going to sow more this week, so it's definitely one that you can sow from now. And I have found that larkspur, after faffing around with it, if you're still getting cold temperatures in spring, direct sow it. So I kind of germinated some indoors, and I use a cold stratification method where I wrap it in paper towel, pop that in the fridge, and then bring them out and put them in a dark cupboard because they do like darkness to germinate as well. And I thought, this is just such a faff. So I actually direct sowed some in a raised bed, and they have popped up beautifully. They do like darkness to germinate, as I said. So I buried them to around, I would say, 1/2 centimetre depth, and just completely covered them with the soil. And it took a little bit longer than germinating them indoors, but they are popping up now after about a month. So nice one to direct sow. And I will say that I am a seed sowing control freak. I hate direct sowing. I just like sowing in my punnets where I know where everything is and everything's labelled nicely. So for me to say it's a good one to direct sow, please trust me with that. It is, yeah, it's going to do well direct sown. The next one is straw flower. Now, straw flower is just such a great kind of basic flower if you're growing cut flowers, either for sale or for yourself or for gifts. It's really a workhorse in the garden, and you're going to get a lot of stems from it. Now, I sow this in autumn and in the spring, and I'll continue to sow it through spring as well. I will stop sowing over summer when it gets really warm. I'll have a little break and then start sowing again kind of late summer, really, for those autumn plantings. Dianthus. Now, I love dianthus, and I'm running a little experiment this year. So dianthus, they're technically a perennial, but I have a feeling that the production really wanes in their second year. So I am running an experiment. So I've left in my second year dianthus, but I've also sowed a lot in autumn as well. Now, I sow the Shabood series, so I've done the Shabood La France, which is a beautiful blush pink, the Shabood Orange Sherbet, which will be a new one for me. I didn't have a lot of orange in the garden this year, so I wanted to bring little touches of orange just in case I need it throughout the season. And also, there's another one of the Shabood series that I can't remember from the top of my head, but I will pop the name up there. And they're just really beautiful. They're a scented flower, and they are cut and come again. So if you've got a smaller space, they're really great for small spaces because you're going to get a lot of stems out of them. Same as straw flower as well. So dianthus, if you haven't grown them yet, please give them a try. I know they're carnations, and I didn't want to call them carnations because people go, oh, gas station flower. But give them a try. They smell beautiful, and the Shabood series, they're delicate and scented and just really gorgeous. So that is dianthus. Next up is Persian cress. Now, I sowed a whole bed of Persian cress in autumn, and we are building just like a little granny flat in the backyard here, and I had to dig up my whole bed of Persian cress. But it is one that I will sow in autumn, and I'll sow all the way through winter, all the way through spring. And it is just such a great foliage filler flower. So it has beautiful, delicate white flowers when it blooms. And then also the seed pods are really pretty. So it's really great value because kind of you don't have to cut it as soon as it blooms or you're going to waste that flower. You can kind of let it go on the plant until you need to use it. So if you think of a dahlia, you've kind of got a day or two max to cut it at its best. And if not, it's kind of just going to go to waste on the plant. Now, cress, it gives you such a long period of time that you can choose when to cut it. And that's one of the reasons I really love it. I might have a really quiet few days for bouquet orders, and then I might have a lot come in, say, over the weekend. And that means I can just leave the cress for those few days that are quiet. I don't need to cut them. It's not going to go to waste, and then I can harvest it all. They are another one that I will direct seed as well. Wait till a rainy day and just go out with your cress seed and just sprinkle it. Just protect it from the birds so the birds don't eat it all. And it germinates within 24 hours. In the middle of winter, I do the same. Go out on a rainy day, sow it directly. In winter, it can take kind of a little bit longer to germinate, maybe 5 days to a week, just because it's colder. But if you're sowing in spring, just direct sow it, and direct sow it thickly as well. Just make sure that you net it, because it does have a tendency to get all tangled up. The stems are quite kind of delicate and whimsical, and you can end up with a big tangled mess. Now, they're not cut and come again, and that's why I say just sow heavily and keep succession sowing. So even in my bed, when I've got Persian cress that's kind of up to my chin, I'll just sow seed under that, and it's just going to pop up and give me flushes. So you don't need to kind of do your succession plants in a new bed. Just chuck more seed in the bed that you've already got. And for that reason, I like it, because it's great for space as well when you only have a small space. So Persian cress. Now, feverfew. Now, I say I sow feverfew in autumn and spring, but if you've seen my feverfew cuttings video, you'll know that growing from seed is a little bit temperamental. So I tend to grow most of my feverfew from cuttings now. So if you can get your hands on a few established plants, if you are having trouble growing from seed, and then you can just take cuttings from those plants as well. If you do like feverfew, again, it's just one of those staples in bouquets. It's very popular at the moment for that kind of look it gives with weddings and both everyday bouquets as well. Yeah, if you do struggle, check out my video on how to take feverfew cuttings. Mignonette. Now, if you have a spot in your garden or flower farm that is full shade and you're kind of struggling for ways to utilize that space, mignonette is a great filler foliage flower. And it also is one similar to Persian cress, where it has beautiful seed pods as well. So you can leave it on the plant until you're ready to cut. I have sown it in both partial shade and full shade, and find that it thrives in both. Now, this is one that I do lean towards more of an autumn sowing. If you can sow in very early spring, and if you're in the South Island of New Zealand, keep sowing now. We're getting a little warm here in Taupo in 9B for me to be sowing it from now. It does really like that cold. Statice. Now, I'll show you my tray of statice if I can lift it. There we go. So I've got the statice, I think that's Forever Silver, and then the pastels mix as well. Statice is one that if you sow in autumn, you are just going to get, from my experience, longer, stronger, taller stems. But as you can see, I'm still going to sow in spring. It's still totally usable. You're still going to get a lot of stems from your plants. With cold hardy annuals, they're always going to prefer that longer period of cold if you can get them from an autumn sowing. But spring with statice is absolutely fine. If you're going to grow one flower for filler in your bouquets, grow statice. I really like the apricot statice, Forever Happy, the white, pale blue. The only statice that I don't really like is you get one that's kind of highlighter yellow, and you get one that's very kind of royal cornflower type blue, and I found that a little bit tricky to work with. But every other color of statice, you're going to get such great value from the plants, and it's probably the cut flower that I plant the most of here. From one statice plant from an autumn sowing, I can get at least 20, 25, probably even 30 stems over its season. For me in 9B here, it keeps blooming into winter. Obviously production kind of dies off, but it's just such a great flower, especially if you're needing a lot of stems from a small space. Scabiosa. Now, this is Scabiosa Farmer White. So this is a perennial Scabiosa. I'm growing this for the first time this year, so I didn't add it to my favorite perennials just because I wanted to kind of trial it before I give any advice out. So I'm going to let you know how this perennial statice goes. I have sown this just a couple of weeks before spring. I found it's relatively fast growing indoors. I sowed it in just my mini DIY indoor greenhouse, which I have another video on if you're interested in that. But this year I'm sowing the Snow Maiden, which is really beautiful, just a white one, the Salmon Queen, and the Oxford Blue, and also the Dark Night. Now, Dark Night is just so beautiful. It's a very deep burgundy, and I would grow at least a few plants of it just to give your bouquets a little bit of contrast and something a little bit different. even if you're kind of more into your pastels and kind of lighter colors, that burgundy it's really gorgeous. Yeah, I use that one a lot. Scabiosa I sow before I sow kind of end of summer into autumn, and then start again a few weeks before spring, sow through spring. Give it a little break over that summer period where it gets really hot, and then just start the cycle again. So it's one that you can get away with planting later into spring as well if you haven't started any seed sowing. And it's really, it adds a beautiful kind of movement to bouquets, and you can kind of pull it out so it sits a little bit up from the rest of the flowers, and it gives that beautiful movement and texture. Now the next one is another perennial, which is Achillea. Again, it's going to thrive from that earlier autumn sowing, but I do sow into spring, and I take cuttings and divisions from it in spring as well. If you do sow it in spring, you're probably not going to get an abundance of flowers kind of until end of summer, autumn. It's going to take a little bit longer to get going. If you do it as an autumn plant, it's going to bloom earlier in that kind of end of spring into summer period. Another one is Nigella, and I love Nigella. Again, it just adds that little kind of fairy element to bouquets, and it's so pretty and delicate and such an intricate little flower as well. And it's again another one that I will direct sow. So I just scatter the seed packet basically, and it's going to take somewhere. So you can do that in spring and autumn. I really like the blue ones with the black centers. I'll see if I can find a photo, but yeah, really pretty. Now, one I wanted to talk about that is a little bit funny for me are snapdragons. So snapdragons are amazing if you plant them in autumn fall. You're going to get really strong, really thick stems, and they're just they just don't compare to a later spring sowing for me. So I've made the decision this year to not sow snapdragons past the first week of spring. They suffered really badly from rust here last summer. I tried to kind of keep succession sowing them through spring, and the weather just got too hot for them, and they just didn't like it, and they got rust, and yeah, the leaves shriveled, and they just weren't great. So the earlier you can plant snapdragons, the better, and they are a slow grower as well. So as I said, this is the last week I'm sowing snapdragons, and after that, I'm just going to cut my losses and not sow anymore. If I was a little bit more prepared, I would have sowed all of them in autumn, and yeah, they really are better off from an autumn sowing, but you can get away with a very early spring sowing. Now, I've had questions about snapdragon varieties before, I should say snapdragon types. So you'll know if you're kind of a little bit more of an experienced grower that snapdragons fall into different types. Now, if you're confused by this, you can sow all types in autumn. You don't need to worry about it. And all that means is they're just going to bloom at different times throughout spring and summer, depending on their type. But if you want to cut out all the confusion about what type to plant when, just sow them all in autumn. They're just going to bloom in different times. Another one that is really great for autumn, and I'm not going to touch it in spring, unfortunately, is stock. So I just wanted to mention it in this video, even though I'm trying to talk about what you can plant in both seasons, is because stock will often be advertised by seed suppliers as a flower that you can plant in spring. And I've just found that it's not worth it. So if you are low on space, I would cut stock out from a spring sowing. Definitely go for your autumn one. But for me in spring, again, they just really need that long cold, and sowing them in spring doesn't give them enough time to thrive. So stock is one that I won't be sowing in spring, but a lot of places will advertise that you can. Now, this list that I have given you, they are some of my favorites. They're kind of the staples of my spring and autumn sowing. So I hope it gives you a little bit of inspiration for that. I've just seen that my dahlias have just started to, the eyes have just started to swell there, if you can see. Lego man included. Thanks, kids. But that's very exciting. It's a sign that the weather is starting to warm up here when the dahlias start to wake up. So yeah, I am excited for things to come in spring and summer. If you have any questions about any of the flowers that I've spoken about today, please let me know in the comments and I will get back to you. And as always, if you could subscribe, it doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps me make these videos. So thank you. I will see you next time.